G'day! Welcome to True Blue History. I'm Adam Bloom. Today's special guest is artist and author of The Art of Sacrifice, George Petrou. And he has joined us today to talk about the book and how the book came about and the journey and the process of putting this absolute masterpiece together. So, George, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and it's an honour and a privilege to have you on.
Adam, thank you. The honour is all mine. Thank you. Great.
Thank you, George. And so, George, can you just give us a little bit about you as a young fella? Where did you grow up? What school did you go to? And what were your hobbies?
Sure. Okay. I was actually born in Cyprus, a little island in the Mediterranean, back in 1956, in February, and that year we actually came to Australia. So I was the youngest of 6 children. We landed in Australia in Melbourne just before the Olympic Games, just before the Melbourne Cup. So it would have been late October. And my old man's a bit of a punter, so I think he may have planned to be here before the Melbourne Cup. That's what I'm thinking. I came here as an 8-month baby, basically, the youngest of 6, as I mentioned. We lived in a tiny little house in South Yarra. Went to school. The local school was Hawkesbury State School. I went to Prahran High School. And then I did an arts course at Chisholm, which is Chisholm Institute now, which is, I think, it's part of Monash. And that's really my background. So grew up in South Yarra and basically lived there most of my life, basically.
So for you, George, did you have any family members that served in the military for you to eventually do the art of sacrifice? Did you have, where's the military connection for you?
Well, strange enough, Adam, there actually isn't an immediate military connection. I mean, Cyprus was a country in turmoil at the time when we were leaving. Like, there was a lot of unrest between the British, the Cypriots, and the Turks. So it became rather messy. And I think Dad had said, this is not a good place to bring up 6 kids. So that was his reason. So I don't have a personal involvement in that. But I guess my involvement really is I love Australian history. So, when I've read lots of books on Australian history, and a huge part of that was actually World War One. And having sort of read a lot about that, it became just I was so intrigued by the stories behind these young guys who volunteered. So that's really my military connection, is my love for Australian history, I guess.
So obviously I mentioned at the start of the podcast that you are an artist. So when was the turning point for you, and when did the fruition come in of the art of sacrifice?
Sure. Well, when you say I'm an artist, I actually am a graphic artist. So I actually started my business back in 1979. So I've been going for nearly 43 years as a graphic artist. So that's my core business. The turning point, as you mentioned, was 2010. 2010, I was diagnosed with cancer, and it was a bit of a shock because I'd never really spent any time in a hospital, just apart from visiting people. So I'd lived a very healthy life, medical, free of any medical issues, basically. So being diagnosed with cancer was one out of the blue, just like it always is. No one expects to be diagnosed with cancer. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So I thought, if I should survive, I will perhaps just take it a bit easy. I had a number of staff working for me at the time, and I thought maybe I can just rely on them to do more of the grunt work, and I'll just sort of sit in the background and just oversee, but perhaps take up a passion. And one of those passions I had, apart from my Australian history passion, was painting. I'd been doing, prior to 2010, I'd been doing a little bit of abstract painting, and that was okay. I enjoyed it and sold quite a few of those, but I just sort of felt that it was a little bit soulless. I enjoyed doing it, but to me, it didn't have any meaning. And I thought, well, what I'd do, perhaps I can incorporate some of that styling I'd used for my abstract paintings, and perhaps incorporate it with my love for Australian history. So how do I do that? And I thought, well, maybe I can take up portraiture, which is a really interesting one, because if you told me, prior to 2010, George, you'll be doing portrait paintings, I'd say, I don't think so. Anyway, I thought, well, maybe I'll try my hand at portraiture, and perhaps I can and make it a little bit more interesting, and perhaps add the abstract element to it, just to give it that extra bit, because I just feel as though, if you're going to do a portrait and it looks like a photograph, I didn't really see a lot of sense in that. I mean, and I'm perhaps not that good either, but there are people who love doing that realism, and for me, that wasn't interesting to me. So that's where I sort of started. So incorporating abstractness with the portraiture and realism, and because I was painting veterans, it was important that the face is not abstracted in any way. I mean, I figure that the face should be as real as possible, and the rest of it can be abstracted. So that were my guidelines, basically. So that's really where that interest came from.
So, George, for the listener who isn't aware of the book, The Art of Sacrifice, what is The Art of Sacrifice, and what's the book made up of?
Okay. The Art of Sacrifice includes 70 portraits that I painted since about 2010, 2011. So there's 70 portraits ranging from the oldest portrait I painted is Sir Neville House, who was our first VC recipient from the Boer War, right up to Cameron Baird. And when I say Cameron Baird, also we have a number of living people that I painted too. So there's probably about 8 or 9 who are living. So it varies from Boer War, First World War, Second World War, right through to Vietnam, Kokoda, and to current day. So 70 portraits, but I guess the uniqueness of this book is that I was involved with Michael Mann's wonderful book, the Victoria Cross, Australia Remembers. And through that amazing publication, I was with Michael. We interviewed a number of people. So I came along to a couple of interviews, and I'd met some people, and through functions that we had, I got to meet family members. So I thought, well, I've got these portraits. I've met a number of people who are related to the subject of the portraits. I thought maybe I can incorporate those people to write a little cameo story about their relative or whatever the relationship was. So the book is 70 portraits, and we have over 60 authors who have written about the subject of my portraits. And as I said, either family members or people who have written about the subject, whether they're authors or people who are connected by association. So the uniqueness is portraits, 60 different authors, and we have photographed all the authors in black and white. They were photographed by my daughter Grace, who's a photographer. We toured around Australia. We photographed them, and we made sure that the background to the photograph was relevant to the story. So that's, in a nutshell, it's portraits, storytelling by members of the family, black and white photographs of all the authors, and I've sort of made sure that I've made a comment on each portrait as to why I chose that portrait, or how I painted it, or why I painted it the way I have. So that's a bit of a uniqueness. So there's sort of photography, there's artwork, there's storytelling, and it's just a nice mix. And I guess the very first chapter is based on how I started with 2010. What happened to me and how the book sort of evolved, and the people I'd met along the way. So it's been a wonderful journey of meeting people. It's been a real joy, to say the least.
So you mentioned that you started this project in 2010. That was the turning point, but it was many years later that the book began. So how hard of a task was this during lockdown? So it was published you started it in 2019, and what challenges did you face and have to overcome?
Well, the book actually started in 2020. So it was just the start of a lockdown in Melbourne and across Australia. So we had just finished our second last exhibition in Brisbane, and we had on the Gold Coast, and our last one was going to be in Brisbane in March. So that lockdown came in, so that didn't happen. So I had decided that, we're going into lockdown here. The guys who worked for me were all working from home, so I had the studio to myself. So I thought, well, this may be an opportunity to perhaps put a book together. And I thought it'd be a nice way to showcase what we have done. And just so you understand, and all the paintings have actually toured Australia. So they've been a collection of 3 main collections The first one being The Lost Diggers of Vignacourt, which we toured in 2015 and 2016. The second collection is Victoria Cross recipients, and they toured 2017, 2018. And the last exhibition that we worked on prior to lockdown was 12 Great Australian Stories, which features 12 wonderful Australians that I sort of read about, and I just wanted to highlight their stories. So that was how it sort of started. That was the content. I'd actually approached the publisher who had published Michael's book, Denny Nee from Big Sky Publishing. And I rang Denny. I said, Denny, I've got this idea, got all these paintings. And I think if I can get maybe even, 10 or 20 different authors or relatives of the subjects, maybe we can put together a book. And he said, oh, I love the idea, George, let's go for it. So we did that. But, if we fast forward, we end up with 60 authors. So that was a lovely surprise. So how difficult was it? It wasn't really that difficult. It just involved a lot of phone calls, a lot of just getting people involved, and everyone was fabulous. Everyone I approached was very happy to be involved. And all I said was, the book will be called The Art of Sacrifice. Write a little cameo story about that person, and with a bit of an emphasis on sacrifice, because that's what it's all about. And all the stories are very different, which is what I love. They're not all. They are so different. It makes it a little bit special, I think. So we'd decided to. This was something that I wanted to be very much involved with. So I made sure that I designed the logo, I designed the book, and I said, guys, this is the template. You put it together, but this is what I want. So I was very much hands-on on this job. It was very personal for me, and it was an absolute joy.
Absolutely. And that the work shows, George, and that's why I wanted to get you on to talk about it, because it's an amazing book. For the listeners who will listen to this, George, and go out, and at the end we'll put links and everything to where we can buy the book. But it is an amazing book, George. You've done an amazing job, and you're right, going through from the Victoria Cross stories, going right through to Vignacourt and the Lost Diggers at Vignacourt, and then you go through to the everyday paintings. They're amazing, and you should be very proud of it. And I'm just so lucky that I've been able to meet you. And it's a fantastic. As soon as I saw the book, and you painted a good friend of mine actually who's been on the podcast, so Donna Burke,
yes.
And she was the very first veteran I ever interviewed, and she said, "Oh, look, you've got to get George on. If you ever get the chance, you've got to get George on it." And it is a fantastic book that you've done, mate. So well done.
Thank you. And I guess, Adam, the very special thing for me is meeting these people. I mean, I lived a sort of fairly basic life. I was just a mere graphic designer and, just doing my thing. But, given the opportunity to meet some of these people, and I guess it sort of started back in, I think it was 2012, where, a friend, it's a bit of, I'll go through the story because it for me, it's quite interesting, and it just shows how things actually happen and how things develop and things perhaps meant to be. A friend of mine, a guy called Don Fordonis, we were having breakfast. He came to my place, and we were going to go down the road and have some breakfast. And in the studio at the time was a portrait of Ben Robert Smith. And he walked in, he goes, "Oh, wow, who's that guy?" And I said, "Well, that's our VC recipient, Ben Robert Smith." He goes, "Oh, I never heard of him." I said, "Well, he's a pretty famous sort of bloke, but Don didn't know a lot about military history." So anyway, so he'd heard the name Ben Robert Smith. So we head off, we're having breakfast. Don gets a phone call from a friend/client of his. And this client says to Don, "You and your wife are invited to the War Memorial in Canberra next week. I've got a table for us. You'll be going up first class. We're gonna shout you this wonderful opportunity. It'll be a function for the Heart Foundation. We're one of the sponsors." This guy worked for BMW, so he'd organised this sort of table. And says, "So you and Don and your wife Christine are coming up, and the guest speaker will be Ben Robert Smith." Don goes, "Ben Robert Smith, I know that name." So he once he hangs up, he says, "George, you and I are going to Canberra next week. Don't worry about my wife. You and I are going to Canberra." I said, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, Ben Robert Smith's going to be there, and he's going to be the guest speaker." I said, "Oh, that's awesome." So what happened? He told me it was a function for the Heart Foundation, and I think it was White Ribbon. So I thought, well, now I've got this painting here. It's a charity function. It'll be a fundraiser. I know it's a fundraiser. So I actually spoke to Richard Rolfe, who was the patron for the Heart Foundation. And I contacted Richard and I said, you don't know me, but I've got a portrait of Ben Roberts-Smith. I'll be happy to donate it to your function if it is of interest to you. He goes, well, that sounds wonderful, but I'll need to get Ben's permission. He'll need to look at it and make sure he's okay with it. So I quickly sort of finished it off, sent him an image of it. Ben came back, said, yep, love it, happy to do it. So I had to quickly finish it off properly and then send it to Canberra all within a week. So it finally happened. So Don and I go to Canberra, meet Ben, and Keith Payne was there as well. The Prime Minister at the time was there, the Governor General, everyone was there. So I was privileged to meet Ben. We had a bit of a chat, auctioned off the painting, and that was great. So from there, I got to meet all these wonderful people, Richard Rolfe, Keith Payne, and then it just rolls on from there. Then, I donated some other paintings to some other functions in Canberra, and all the other VCs were there as well. I got to meet them, Mark Donaldson, Dan Kieran, Keith again, and Ben. So it's lovely. And then Keith introduced me to the Cross of Valour guys who were also at this function. So it just snowballed from there. So it's amazing, you do a good little deed and sometimes it comes back to you in lots of ways. So and that's really the progress of what happens. You meet one person, you meet someone else. So very privileged for someone who never sort of walked in those circles. It was just a real honour and privilege. And I can't believe to this day, I'm very lucky.
I can absolutely agree with you, George, because I get to meet amazing people like you with, doing the podcast. It's, I'm telling Australia's military history, but I'm also telling veterans stories as well. It's something that I absolutely love and I'm so passionate about. And you're right, it's meeting these veterans, and I had the privilege on Saturday, which we've spoken off air, of meeting Keith Payne VC, and in all my wildest dream, and it was actually through, like you said, connections. It was through our good friend Michael Madden, and just the opportunities that come, and I pinch myself that I got to meet the Cross of Valour guys as well on the weekend, and it was just something so special that, like you say, it's a real honour. And I never thought in my wildest dreams that I would ever meet Keith Payne VC, and especially sit down and actually have a red wine with him was amazing. So I know exactly what you're saying.
Well, Keith is just one of those guys. I mean, he didn't have to do me any favours. He didn't know me from a bar or so, but he sort of gravitated. We just got on so well. But he's that sort of person, and he's always there to help. And even as far as the Art of Sacrifice, he actually rang me during the production. He said, "George, who's writing the foreword for your book?" I said, "Keith, I haven't really decided yet, but I thought I'll think of asking you." And he said to me, No. I'll get Cozzy to write it. And I'm thinking, who's Cozzy? I mean, Cozzy, is that a mate of his? Is it someone from the footy club, the rugby club, the cricket club? Who's Cozzy? And I said, look, I'll just keep talking, and I'll perhaps work out who it is. And so, no, look, I'll get Sir Peter to have a look at it. And I said, oh, now I realise who he's talking about, because I never heard Sir Cozzy before. I should have dawned on me. Anyway, I said, my God, Sir Peter Cosgrove, that would be awesome. So he said, well, just send Sir Peter a draft and he'll have a look at it, he'll decide. So obviously I did that. And Sir Peter came back to me and said, look, I'd be delighted to write forward. So thank you, Keith Payne. And it's just, and thank you, Sir Peter Cosgrove. I mean, it's just very, very special, very special.
Absolutely. And it is, mate. And that's from meeting Keith on Saturday. He's that type of bloke. Exactly what you're saying. That is just Keith. He wants to help people. That's why, he's just, and he's just that type of bloke that if you ask, he will generally do it for you. He's just, he's just a fantastic bloke. And, it just, like you said, by chance that you got to meet Keith, and it just like you said, those opportunities come, and you take them and run with them, and that's what you've done. And so for you, there's many stories in the book, and can you share with us your favourite story and just a little bit about why it's your favourite story?
Well, there are probably 60 favourite stories in there, but if I had to pick one out, I'm thinking it would probably be the Walter Spencer story. Very special to me, and I'll try not to get too emotional about this. It all goes back to 2000 and I've got to think about this. 2020. It was Remembrance Day, and I was at Box Hill RSL. My daughter Grace was photographing the Remembrance Day service, and I was just in the background, just looking on. And this young chap comes up to me and says, "Oh, you're George Petrou?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "You're the artist who's painted the Lost Diggers collection." I said, "That's correct." And he said, "Oh, look, I know your work. I'm a TPI veteran." And he's an Afghan veteran who's done a number of tours over there. He said, "I know your work. I love your work. And I'd love you to meet. Would you spend some time? I'd like you to meet my friends, and I'm sure they would be delighted to chat with you." So I said, "I'd be very happy to do that." So we sort of went into the club room. We had a couple of drinks and was just chatting about things. And there was something about this guy that I really, really liked. He was a little bit special. And so we had our little drinks and had a conversation. Then we parted ways, and he rang me that night. And he obviously must have. I didn't leave him my card. He must have Googled me and got my phone number. And he rang me and said, "George, just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us." And I said, "Michael, it was my absolute pleasure. It was lovely to meet your mates." And I decided after I'd met them that I wanted to give Michael a gift. And I said, "Michael, would you accept a gift if I sent you something?" And he said to me, "George, you don't need to do that." And I said, "I know I don't, but I would like to. So if you'd like to text me a forwarding address, I'd like to send you something." No, I didn't tell him what it was. So he sent me an address, and I decided I'd send him one of my Lost Diggers portraits. There was Walter Spencer. I did two of Walter, and I thought this one may be an appropriate one because he said to me he really liked the abstract, the more abstract ones. So I knew I had one of Walter Spencer that was a bit more abstract than normal. And so I sent him the portrait, and all I said to him was, "Michael, thank you for your service, and this is one of the portraits from my collection that hasn't toured. It was like a secondary one that I had. The guy's name is Walter Spencer, and he lived in Richmond." That's all I told him. I said, "There's no need to tell him anymore. He'd get more detail from Ross Coulthard's book, The Lost Diggers of Vindicore." Anyway, he received the portrait, and he rang me the minute he received it, and he said to me, "George, you're not going to believe this, but Walter Spencer is my wife's great-grandfather." So I had no idea. How would I know? So just unbelievable coincidence. Now I know that Walter Spencer also worked for the railways, and he worked at one of the stations he worked at was Hawkesbury railway station. I went to Hawkesbury Primary School, and that was our local railway station. So who knows? I maybe even met him as a young lad and not even known. So just those things. And what we did do is as the photographer, he wrote the story. He recalls his story in the book, and I asked him, "Would you be happy to bring your kids along, your father-in-law, your wife, and let's photograph them at the Hawkesbury railway station?" So the whole family, there's 3 generations of Spencers at the Hawkesbury railway station. So to me, that's a lovely story. Yeah.
Absolutely, just the pieces of history that you're capturing, and just amazing, George. Just absolutely amazing. And like you mentioned that one, Walter, was hard for you to paint, but also there's another painting in the book to me that is just so striking, and the how you did this, I truly believe you have captured just the true cost of war and what war does to a man. And can you tell us a little bit about when you painted Martin O'Meara VC, and how hard was this painting for you to paint?
I had a feeling you were going to mention that painting. Yeah, look, it was a very difficult one, perhaps the most difficult of the lot. And I must admit, I originally thought, yes, I must paint this. And then I thought, you know what? I don't think I can. His story is way too emotional and too sad. And I had an idea how I was going to paint it. And then I changed my mind. I said, no, I don't think I can do this, because my original version idea was to make it very dark and perhaps very black and just heavy. Because, you know, for those who don't know, Martin Spencer was a stretcher bearer at Pozieres, and he'd saved I think it was about 23 or 24 lives, and he was going in amongst bullets and cannons and fire bombs exploding. He was just his action was unbelievable. So I thought, no, I don't think I can do this. Now, Michael Madden, once again mentioning Michael, he said, George, I'd really like you to paint that if you could. And I said, Michael, I don't think I can. It's just a heavy sort of subject that I don't think I can do. Anyway, I sort of thought, I'm going to give it a go. For you, Michael, I'll give it a go. So what I did do, I just sort of basically painted his face, but half his face is basically the destruction at Pozieres, like flying bits of wood, and also half of it is basically wreckage. And it actually it did destroy his life, because Martin O'Meara spent the last 17 years of his life in an asylum, and he never quite recovered. So it was a very heavy painting to do, but a wonderful VC. And further to that, the very first VC, the original one that I ever held, was Martin O'Meara's. As part of Michael's book, we all went to Perth, went to the Fremantle Military Museum there, and Martin's VC is actually the original one is there, along with two other ones. So it was the first one that I actually held. So it's a little bit special for me too, that we actually held his VC. But that was a very strong one. Yeah.
It is, George, because that story always cuts me up. Every time I read Martin's story, every time I read his citation, and I learnt through Michael when we did Dasha Wheatley's podcast, and that's another amazing VC as well. And they all are. They all are, but there's just certain ones that just capture you, and Martin's story is just, I learnt through that podcast with Michael that Martin was a pacifist. He didn't want to shoot a gun, but he'd do everything in his power to help wounded and drag ammunition up, and it's just, as Michael said in the podcast, he said that if the ilk of our Victoria Cross recipient can come, literally his life can come apart at the seams, and he literally did. Like, he came back and he did an interview when he came back, and they said, "Where are you living?" And he said, "Oh, under the next gum tree," and he was homeless. And just it's, yeah, you've really captured it so well, George. You really, really have, and well done to you. And I will put a picture up when I promote this episode, and because you've done a fantastic job on that, and it's a very haunting, but the way you captured his eyes, it just is, and you've captured it in the hell of what Pozieres was, and then what happened to this amazing man, and the last 17 years that he lived his life in an asylum and tried to self-harm himself and others, and then succumb. Just an amazing story, and one that, it's very sad, very, very sad. And
look, I think the other interesting one there too is Hugo Throstle's story. I don't know if you know much about his life was completely different. He'd come from a very wealthy family, and cut a long story short, he basically, when he got back, he was awarded his VC at Gallipoli, but he came back and spoke out against the war, and everyone turned on him, including his family. He lost his job, the banks foreclosed on him, his family disowned him, and fast forwarding, he ended up taking his own life.
Recording stopped.
Okay, look, I guess another interesting story, and perhaps by contrast, is the Hugo Throstle story. Background, his father was the first premier of WA, so he lived came from a very wealthy background, and but he was awarded his VC during the Gallipoli campaign, came back to Australia. He was basically the pin-up boy, tall, good-looking, light horse guy, sportsman, all that, everything going for him. But what he did was he spoke out against the war, and that was a no-no in those days because they really wanted to promote the whole thing. So his family disowned him. The banks foreclosed on him. Friends just didn't want to know about him, and so much so that ended up taking his life. So just a complete contrast. So you just don't know how these things are going to affect people. But yeah, it's just a sad story. And look, we were fortunate enough to meet his granddaughter who lives in Melbourne. She told us the story, and even Hugo Throttle had a son, and he was so distraught. He was just a young lad. But fast forward, he took his own life as well at a later age. So very, very sad, very sad. You just don't know.
It's like Michael said, George, and I know we refer to Michael a bit, but like Michael said with the research that he did with the book, the VC can either it makes somebody, or in Martin O'Meara's case and also Hugo Throttle, it destroyed their lives really. So it's an amazing award, but it has a big burden and a big responsibility that comes with it.
Exactly right. Exactly, and that's why I called the subject the chapter on the VCs. I called it "Across the Bear" because that's exactly what it was. I thought it was quite appropriate. But there you go.
100%. It's a fitting title. So in the book, George, can you tell us some of the other contributing authors and what a little bit about them?
Yeah. Well, I guess. We're very fortunate to have Sir Peter Cosgrove right forward, which is fantastic. But prior to that, I'd had the pleasure of meeting our current Governor General, David Hurley, and he had a function for us a number of years ago, and we thought it was appropriate that perhaps we donate a painting. I donate a painting, and the background was he was very much into the First Nations people and the story of the Indigenous people, and I'd actually painted a First Nations soldier from the First World War. He was unknown. We didn't know who he was. So we thought it would be appropriate to perhaps donate that to him. So we donated to him at Government House in New South Wales, and he was very, very pleased with it, and so pleased that I know that he had in his office when he was Governor of New South Wales, and so much so that when he became the Governor of Australia, he took with him to Government House in Canberra, and I saw it there about a month ago, sitting directly opposite his desk. So he was taken by that. So he also, I asked him, would he write a story about what sacrifice means to him? So he wrote that along with his wife Linda. They wrote a story on sacrifice. So Peter Cosgrove and Keith Payne, obviously another contributor. Ross Coulthard, who obviously found the Lost Diggers plates. He's a heavy contributor in the book. Of course, Michael Madden, who we've mentioned so many times, he's written a couple of stories in there as well. So look, we're in a number of Lambus and Glazos, and we've just been so many wonderful authors have written in there. Michael Larisky, who wrote about Albert Jacka, who wrote the two wonderful books on Albert Jacka. So he's a contributor as well. So very, very blessed with wonderful writers. Yeah.
So we mentioned that, throughout the book, we've talked about the Victoria Cross recipients. And for you, what was it like meeting the families, and how hard was it to paint some of these portraits of the VC recipients, knowing what had happened to them?
Well, I guess once again, was fortunate enough to meet them through Michael Madden's book. This seems like a plug for Michael Madden, and why not? Hearing the stories, and look, when I paint, I quite often like to listen to a podcast and just try and understand a little bit more about them, or certainly whatever information I can read in a book. How difficult was it? Not that difficult. When you get to understand their personality, and quite often in the portraits, I will include parts of their personality. I mean, rather than just do a straight portrait, I try and, if there's added interest to the stories. For example, Rupert Moon VC, he enlisted as a trumpeter, bugle trumpeter is what's mentioned in the book. And so I included a trumpet there. But I also know that he was when he came back from the war, he was very much interested in horse racing. And he owned a horse with another VC, Dunstan. And this horse was called Maid of Money, MAID. So on top of the bugle the trumpet that I'd included, I put 3 horses on top of 3 race horses, and on the saddle cloths I put made on one of them, of in the other, and money on the other. So just little bits of this personality in these stories. So it just sort of lightens it up, and I sort of just like to do that because it just rather than just have a straight portrait that looks like a photograph, a little bit of interest goes a long way. So I really enjoyed hearing about them and trying to get a bit of their personality into the portrait. So it wasn't that difficult. I love doing it.
So when you're painting, and I want to ask you this, when you're painting these portraits, is the painting speaking to you as you're painting it, George, or is it? Explain a little bit about that to us, please.
Well, I'm one of these strange characters who when I'm painting, I like peace and quiet. I don't like distractions. So most times I'd get up about 3 a.m. and I start painting. In the dead of the night, there's no phone calls, there's no emails, there's no background noise, apart from the odd podcast going in the background. But so it's something that I enjoyed. I've actually lost the first part of your question there. Well,
so
been sidetracked
no,
here.
That's okay, George. So what it was when you're painting these paintings, do they speak to you? Does it speak to you?
Yeah, look, I guess it does. I sort of, because I know their background, and quite often these things can change too. Like I might have an idea to go this way, but then it evolves and turns around and becomes something completely different. So it does need to speak to me, and I need to be very comfortable. And I put lots of layers on my paintings. And if I'm not happy with it, I just put another layer over top of it. So it needs to speak for me to be totally happy with it. So understanding their personality and what they did, I need to be very comfortable with it. And quite often there's lots of layers of paint. If I'm not happy, I just keep another layer of paint over the top. And I guess with my style, it's not a perfect style. It can look very messy. So I flick a bit of paint on these things too. So if I'm flicking and it happens to go through the face, well, it stays there. I don't go back and rework it. To me, it's meant to be, and I'm pretty easy. It's a very loose interpretation, but it's something that I particularly like. So it's just the way it works.
So I mentioned Martin O'Meara's painting at the start of the podcast, but is there, for you, out of all the VC paintings that you've done, is there one that is your favourite and stands out the most to you, and why?
I don't know. Do I have a favourite? I've got to say, I really like them all. They're all quite different. There's a lot of them that they do look different, and I want that they couldn't all look exactly the same. They just couldn't be 3/4 no, look, I'm a big fan of all of them, to be honest. And it's not only the VCs. And we had the Lost Diggers, and they were the first paintings that I did. And a lot of people say we really like the very first ones because they're very much, to quote Terry Paul, he said, "I love this one because it's raw and unplugged." And the one he was referring to was the original Walter Spencer portrait that he actually bought. So I think I perhaps started off a little bit more abstract than I perhaps tightened up. I'm not quite sure, but these things evolve. Some are quite real, like for example the Banjo Patterson one. I've kept that sort of fairly real, but some of them are quite abstract. So there's a mixture, and I like them all. And if I didn't like them, they wouldn't be in the book. So I can't give you the exact answer. That I love them all. Yeah, I just love these stories. I just love their stories, and for me, it's the stories more so than the paint. And to hear a family member talk about it, well, it just makes it very special.
Yeah, it's like asking, like you're a father,
Favorite child.
favorite child, and you're supposed to be impartial and say I don't have favorites, and that's good, George. I'm glad that because they are, like, for me, there's a few that stood out for me, and they were really. I loved your.
You tell me, Adam. What did you like? Which one? I know you like Martin O'Meara.
Yeah, Martin O'Meara. I loved Sir Neville House. His painting was absolutely amazing. I really, really like Bruce Kingsbury, even though it's not one of your favourite. I know that for a fact. But yeah, Bruce Kingsbury. I really liked his.
You just made a liar out of me, Adam.
No, I didn't, George. No. But and also, I loved Dash's. I love Dash's painting
Yeah,
and the story behind Dash's heroic action that day. And mate,
sure.
I'm like you a little bit. I guess I like all of them, and I like that, as you say, it's the story. It's the story behind and actually
Yeah.
putting a painting to the, like, some of them I didn't know I'd never seen their faces before. Like, I'd read the citations, but I'd never seen a
Hmm.
portrait or a painting, and it was, yeah, they're all fantastic.
Hmm.
So, Michael, what?
Can I interrupt
Yes,
you
yeah.
for a second? You mentioned Neville House, and that to me is a fairly straight one. But a lot of people have said, George, that's really interesting, because I noticed the background you've used the Red Cross symbol because he was a medic. And they said, why? I mean, it's always red. And I said, yes, well, I changed it from red and I've gone over to orange. I said, why would you do that? I said, well, you may not know this, but Sir Neville House was the mayor of Orange, the New South Wales town. So that's why it's orange. So it was a bit of a tribute to the fact that he was a mayor. He was also the defence minister for the Australian government. So he was a very, very important man. But it was just that twist of colour, which makes it a little bit different. That's sort of what I like doing. Yeah.
That's something that you learn every day, and I like what you've done there with how you've connected their homeland of what they did
Mm,
when they came back from the war as well, and it's sort of for you with the posthumous ones that you painted,
mm.
and we're talking about the posthumous Victoria Crosses. What, for you, like when you were painting them, was there any connection that you could do, or did you have to do that through the families, or were they a lot harder to do?
Well, I guess with Cameron Baird being our most recent one, that was the problem, because I'd met the family a number of times, and I certainly had permission to do that. But what I wanted to do, anyone who died during their, well, whether it was a CT or just a normal battle, if they passed away, I would just include a very long blood drip all the way, a red drip all the way down the side of the page. So that was for me just commemorating what they did and their ultimate sacrifice. So that was my little contribution to their sacrifice, I guess, in a very, very minor way. But yeah.
So, George, what can we learn as the public? What can we learn through art and in you painting our veterans? What can we learn through art, through their sacrifice that they've made?
Well, look, I'd like to think that the paintings would capture their imagination, and they would want to read about them. Who was this person? What did they do? And it's just an interesting way of telling someone you should read about this guy. Well, have a look at the painting, and when we exhibit these paintings, always make sure that there's a bit of a story, an A3 display that tells them the story. So when you go to a gallery and you see a portrait and say, well, who is that guy? And then there may be a name underneath, and I say, yeah, great, but what did he do? Where was he? Where did he live? What did he do when he come? Did he survive the war? So we always make sure there's a little bit of a story there, and that's just a bit of a teaser to go out and learn more. So that's what we like to do is basically try and educate the people and say, this guy has sacrificed this. This is what he did when he came back, or he didn't survive the war. Go out and read more. And it's an educational program. It's a respect. It's commemorating what he did, and we should never forget the sacrifices these people made, because they're very, very special. And educational tool too, and just for our young kids too. I mean, I'd like to get these into school libraries and donate them and get our kids to understand what they're all about.
So George, can veterans art, can it help Australians understand our military history? And for those who don't want to read books, can the depiction of art, can that help, like with you, if you were to paint a battle, can that help Australians understand what has gone, what's happened?
Look, I guess you have to be very careful, because you don't know how people are going to react to these things. I mean, maybe imagery or sounds or noises could perhaps trigger off something, but I just sort of feel that just art is just another way of expressing one's personality or their feelings without words. I mean, words can be sometimes different, so it's another way of expressing feeling, and I think once they get into the, I know when I get into the zone, I'm in that zone, and don't talk to me. I'm just focusing here. And if a veteran takes up art and gets into that zone, it's a very special feeling. And I think it gives them self-esteem. It gives them confidence, and I think it's relaxing as well. So I think it's a form of meditation, and I think it can work for them for sure. So, and I guess you probably need someone to perhaps even direct you, maybe a person who, a therapist perhaps, who could sort of guide you, but get into that zone. It's very special. And I think it's working really well for veterans in this day. So I've met lots of veterans who are taking up art, and whether it's photography, sculpture, whatever, it's wonderful.
So do you now, like, you've had like many veterans that you've painted, and do you actually paint them live as well, George, or is it?
No, look, no, I don't. I don't. I'll work off a photograph. People don't really have the time for that, and I don't know how good I would be to have someone sit in front of me and try and do it. I need my own time, my own space, and people are very time poor, and I don't think I'd want someone to come to my place at 3:00 in the morning either. So no, and look, I guess you can always, once you've got a number of images, you can just with research, you can find a bit more about their background, where they lived, and try and incorporate some of those elements. So to do it in a live situation, it's just not going to happen. And I think people are happy just to supply photos, and that way they know this is what they're going to get. Whereas, you don't know what you're going to get if it's live. And I'm not so sure how good I am either, to be honest. But I just need my own space, my own time, and my own environment, and little distractions. Yeah.
Well, you're very humble, George, because your paintings are fantastic, and I say that to you because they are truly amazing, and you've captured some amazing history in what you've painted. So you're very humble, very, very humble. And if we can talk about the book sales, where do the proceeds go, please, George?
Okay. Well, look, my background is through Michael Madden, when I met Michael Madden and Gordon Trail, when they interviewed me when they were doing their book, that's how our friendship evolved. And they told me they were doing this book to raise money for TPI, who I'd never heard of. And they explained to me who they were and what they did. And they introduced me to the larger TPI family, and I met them, and I was very impressed with their work. So fast forward here again, a year or so later, they made me their patron, which was a huge honour for me. So I was the patron of the TPI in Victoria, and they're just wonderful people. So I decided all profits from the sale of this book will go to TPI. So it's something that I wanted to do, and it's very, very special. So that's what we decided to do. There was also a suggestion that maybe we should use the book in lieu of a wreath. So if you go to a service, say Anzac Day, Remembrance Day, maybe you could purchase the book, and what we would do is we would shrink wrap it, we would put a lovely ribbon around it, put a poppy, some rosemary, and you could lay it in lieu of a floral wreath, and then donate it to your local school or local library or a local organisation. So, with floral arrangements, they get thrown out a day later, and they're not exactly cheap either. So buy a book and donate it, and that book will last another 100 years and becomes an educational tool as well. So I thought, not my idea. I'd love to claim it. It's not my idea, but I think it's a great idea. Whether it's my book or Michael's book or someone else's book, at least it's a valuable tool that is not thrown away.
That's right, George. And for the people who aren't aware, can you just tell us what TPI stands for, please, George?
Totally and permanently incapacitated, veterans, male or female. So what they do, they look after advocacy, their welfare, and all that sort of thing. So they've been around for nearly 100 years. So they're a wonderful organisation. They're all around Australia. I'm just involved with the Victorian branch, and they're wonderful people.
Well, it's an amazing, because Michael told me this as well, and it's an amazing thing for especially the publishers to, it costs, like, for them, that's a big cost as well, and for them to be a part of that, it's truly special, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And what we did do, Adam, I decided we would get sort of 12 books signed by all the authors. So we went around. I don't know why I do these things, but I thought it'd be an easy job. It wasn't that easy, actually, because you're picking up all these books, you take them to people's houses or their place of work, and we got them all to sign their stories. So we have these books that have got over 60 signatures, and we thought we would perhaps sell these, auction them off at some fundraisers. So we're very fortunate. Earlier this year, we were the guest speakers at the Essendonians function, the Anzac Day game. And it was the Essendonians is the coterie group for the Essendon Footy Club. So we were guest speakers at Crown Casino, and they had, I think it was about 800 people there. And so we auctioned off one of the books. So it sold for $5,000, which is fantastic. So we were able to donate those funds to TPI, and another one of the charities is Path the Horse, which is run by Dean Miles, and he uses his horses as horse therapy for some of our veterans. So they got $2,500 each, which is fantastic. So we're looking forward to the next function. Maybe we can get more, but it's $5,000 is more than one book, that's for sure. So it was very special.
Wow, it is, and it's the power of giving back, George. That's what it is, and it makes you feel special as well, and all the hard work, and it's all worth it. And you've both, Michael and you, have done a fantastic job for TPI, and I know you're both very proud of your books, and you should be, and I encourage everyone who listens to this, George, go out and buy a copy of The Art of Sacrifice. You will not be sorry that you did. It's a fantastic book, and there's some amazing history. And so, George, can you tell us a little bit about ANVAM and your connection to ANVAM?
Okay, ANVAM is a national based in Melbourne, and it's a national body for veterans, and they it's run basically by Tanya and Mark Johnson, who are the main players there, I guess. And Tanya being an art therapist, so she looks after a lot of the veterans who come with whether they want to do sculpture, photography, or painting. We were very fortunate enough to have our official launch was at the ANVAM offices in St Kilda Road, when Sir Peter Cosgrove came down to launch our book just before Anzac Day. So they've been great supporters, and they're one of the charities that we're donating money to. So they're just another great organisation looking after veterans in that art area. So we're very happy to be associated with them.
And I actually had the privilege to meet them last week when I was in Melbourne, George, when you and I were supposed to catch up, but you got COVID, unfortunately, so that stopped us from meeting up. But we will meet up when I come back down. But yeah, they do an amazing job, and for the listener, it's the Australian National Veterans Art Museum, and they will be coming on the podcast next year because they're doing fascinating story, and there's some really good history of what they're trying to do currently, and the space that they're trying to get. So they will be on next year to talk about more about what they're doing and the amazing work that they do. So stay tuned, and watch this space. So George, what are you working on now?
Okay, I'm working on a body of work that'll be called 12 Great Australian Women. So it's more based around humanitarian work, more so than military, but there is some military connection. So it's just wonderful Australian women who have done so much for this country. And I've I haven't said it in stone, but there was 12, 8 from the past and 4 who are currently living. So I want to make it a blend of both. The main focus of this one is a story about a lady called Joyce Locke. Her story is amazing, very much unknown. She's our most decorated Australian, and no one's heard of her, and that's not uncommon. But I want to try and change that. She's worth Googling. I won't go into the story, but it is an amazing story, and it's Joyce. It's Joice. And it's Locke, Loch. So that's what I'm working on. I would like to think we'd have it done in the next 12 months, and we'd like to tour it around Australia. What I would like to say, Adam, with all the paintings in the book have toured, and as I may have mentioned, there's 3 separate collections that was toured. And the reason that happened was due to the generosity of a company called Findex. Findex is run by 2 brothers, Terry and Spiro Paul. They're based in Melbourne. I'd had the privilege of meeting Terry at a function. Well, it wasn't so much a function. It was Terry was involved in a group called the Lemnos Gallipoli Commemoration Group, and their main focus was to build a statue to the nurses that went to Lemnos, which was part of the Gallipoli campaign. So the wounded soldiers would go to the island of Lemnos. There was Australian nursing set up there. Nurses were set up there, and they'll be looking after the veterans. So Terry Paul, the Paul brothers are from the island of Lemnos, and they wanted to give back. So I got involved with them. We finally built this statue, and it's currently in Port Melbourne, and it's of a lady called Matron Grace Wilson. So Terry, I'd actually volunteered to donate a painting to them to help raise some money. So when I approached them, I said, look, why don't you come to an annual general meeting, bring your work, and we'll see whether it's of interest to us. So I took some of our work, and they were interested, and particularly Terry. Terry contacted me about a week later and said, George, I'd like to see the rest of your work. I love what you're doing. So he came over with his wife, and I'd had a lot of paintings and we had a fairly large home, and we had a large hallway, and we had a lot of paintings on the wall. And Terry came by and said, yep, I'll have that one, I'll have that one. I said, well, Terry, these are not for sale. These are a collection that I'd like to exhibit. And Terry was a little bit taken back, I guess. But he said, look, I want to talk to you about this, but why don't we get together perhaps in a couple of weeks' time? Maybe we can work something out. I said, okay, well, we can do that, but I don't know what there is to work out. These paintings are not for sale. Anyway, we got together a couple of weeks later, and he said, George, I thought about what you said, and what would you say to if my company toured your paintings and we did them as client experiences, and we'll travel you all around Australia, we'll pay for your expenses, and we'll take the paintings along, and there'll be client experiences and something different. Rather than a golf day or a movie night, it'll be an art night. You can talk about your paintings. We'll exhibit your paintings. We can do a meet and greet, and it'll be something a bit different. So that's what we did. So the first tour was the Lost Eagles of Vinyacourt, and that was a great success. And they were really, not surprised. I expected that to be a success, but it really exceeded their expectations. So when that was finished, they said, George, what are you doing next? I said, oh, okay, I think I'm going to do a collection on the VCs. They said, well, can we tour those as well when you finish them? I said, sure we can, because I really enjoyed it, because we were going to outback country towns, main cities. It was fabulous. Beautiful venues, lovely food and drink. It was just ideal. So the VC collection I thought was even better than the first one, but I loved the first lot. Then when we finished those ones, I said, what are you doing next? I said, I think I'd like to do 12 great Australian stories. So I said, could we do those as well? So this went on 3 times. So it was fabulous. So I am indebted to Findex Group for their generosity, their support. So it would be great if we had more corporates doing these things like that, because it's just a little bit different. It's just not your golf day or your movie night. So it was really highly educational, and they received wonderful reviews from all that. So maybe there's more corporates listening out there. Maybe you should consider something like that. There you go.
And George, you've also got, coming up in August, you've got an event in Brisbane. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you're doing with up in Brisbane?
Yes, look, we tried to get there a few times, but it's just COVID's just kept getting in the way. So we've now locked in. The main function will be at the Royal Historical Society of Queensland, and that they're based in William Street in Brisbane. So we'll be doing a function there, and then we'll be doing one at Currumbin RSL as well. So really looking forward to getting to Brisbane. It's been a little while since our last foray, which was 2020, before COVID. So that's our next exciting adventure to launch the book. So we've launched it in Melbourne and Adelaide basically, and Brisbane's next, and we'll get to Sydney and Canberra and Tassie hopefully soon as well.
So George, how do people get a signed copy of the book?
Well, they can just contact me, and I'd be more than happy to do that. You can go to my website, georgepetru.com.au, or give me a call. Happy to do it. We can just post them out. So happy to write anything you like in there, or just post it out to you. Not a problem at all. It'd be my pleasure.
Well, George, want to, and you've just mentioned, how people can get in contact and how they get a signed copy of the book. Is the book's, it's published by Big Sky Publishing, so it's out in all the major retailers?
Yes, yes, it certainly is. It out in all the major retailers. I guess, and happy to purchase the book anywhere. The only way we'll make donations to TPI and the other charities would be if they're purchased from me, all my profits will go there. Purchase from bookstores, well, there's not really any profit there, but at least we're getting the book out to other people. Maybe someone else will just pass on the word, because it is mentioned in the book in the early chapters that purchases made by me through me will be donated to veteran charities. So, but it's a good thing.
George, I want to thank you for coming on today and telling us about the art of sacrifice. And it's as I said throughout the podcast, it's been an amazing job that you've done, and it's been to capture this history. And as you said, you've gone from the Lost Diggers of Inyacore, you've done the Victoria Cross, and then you've done ordinary Australians as well as other veterans in that space. It's an amazing job that you've done, and you should be very proud of what you've been able to achieve. And I just want to thank you for coming on and sharing the background of the art of sacrifice. And George, it's been an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on. So George Petrou, thank you for coming on True Blue History.
No, my pleasure. And look, just further to that, Adam, if anyone would like me to present the book to them, if they're part of a group or an RSL, I'd be delighted to do that. So thank you for supporting the book. It's been great talking with you. It was lovely to meet you a little while ago, and look forward to meeting you again. So thank you, Adam, for the wonderful work that you do. It's great to be involved. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, George. Thank you, mate. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast on whatever platform you get your podcasts. And if you feel like supporting us, you can now via our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/truebluehistory, or buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/truebluehistory, and check out our new website, truebluehistory.com, for more great content.